Hey Dan, welcome back to the show.
Hi again.
Last time we spoke about the minimum viable product and the different ways that people interpreted this concept. And we ended looking at how we could make this better. And I think today we can speak about what our approach is, what our approach at Dinghy is, and how we're using the MVP approach to start projects. And in digital product design, to have to develop a more streamlined process, no matter the stage that you're in. But let's take it from the top, I would say. Let's go through the different methodologies that we employ. What's usually the first step that we take?
Usually we look at the product or feature and try to understand what's happening there from a business perspective, from the goals of the users that will work with the product or feature. And this is done in a stage that we call discovery research, where we talk to stakeholders, do some desk research, and basically explore the problem space to better understand what we're looking at.
And so discovery research is, to maybe put this in a little bit simpler terms, otherwise I think these terms always sound so exciting. It's like
Yeah,
discovery research.
it sounds complex.
It sounds complex, right?
Yeah.
But it basically means you might have an idea and you still need to validate this in any way, right? Like you have a product idea, you didn't even start out yet. Like discovery research could, for example, untangle who's your target audience, for example, or like what are ways to actually apply discovery research.
Also, see how others do similar things to understand what solutions are out there already and what might be distinguishing factors to what you are doing.
So would you categorize like competition research into discovery, for example?
Yeah, I mean, we would at least look at it. I don't know, like it doesn't necessarily need to be in there. This kind of depends on the project, on the time frame that we have, and so on. But looking what's out there is definitely part of this.
Yeah. And I think that is a step that I'm not sure if everybody gives it like a distinctive name, so to say, right? Like I think we usually, when we start a project in our agency context, then we do get a briefing, right? Like if it's a startup now, to stick with the example of a startup, they usually come around not with only the idea, right? But
Yeah,
they already did some research. They
yeah,
already
sure.
did some probably discovery research,
Yeah,
right? There's some competition in there. There's some, or maybe there's competitors or similar ideas in other markets or something like that. And yeah, and we usually get like a page or two of briefing, right? Like
with examples and what they like, what they don't like. Yeah,
with the, oh yeah, examples of other websites and so
yeah,
on. Yeah, right. But the point is that in discovery research, you already have the opportunity to steer as much as possible into the right direction. Right? Like to remind us a little bit of the point that we were trying to make in the last episode is that the entire idea of an MVP, of a minimum viable product, is to test your premise, basically, to test if the original idea and then enriched with the information about your target group and whose problem you're trying to solve, if you can in fact actually solve their problem, right? Like
yeah,
that's the idea of an MVP. And our critique was that often an MVP is made way too big. There are way too many features in an MVP, so it's actually not like the minimal thing.
yeah. I
And
think the discovery research, just to get at this picture, is basically to start building the frame around this problem space, so you know in which part and direction you're working in.
yeah, that's a very pretty picture to imagine. So you're kind of putting a fence around the area that you're working in, right? Like you're framing it inside of this box so you don't go nuts, I suppose. Yeah. Like you reduce the risk of spinning into all sorts of directions. And cool. So there's you already said there's desk research, right? Like a briefing can contain, like if it's in form of a briefing can contain other websites that the customer likes in general, just style wise, right? Like this is always also a mixture of we like their branding, we like how they speak,
how they make me feel,
exactly. And then it's mixed up with actual competitors in the same space, whose website might actually not be so pretty, but they like a specific part of it or something. But so something that we also do apart from desk research is actually talking to people, right? Like there's the interview phase. And how does that go? Like what happens in an interview when you just have an idea? I mean, what do you ask for?
I think so. I'm not the expert there. We would need to talk to Nocebo as the expert. But generally, what I think is happening is we talk to people involved. This is true for the people like our clients usually, or the people working on the product, but also people from the outside that might be part of the target audience to better understand if what we're trying to do is actually meaningful to them.
Oh, you touched on an interesting point that I totally had forgotten about, that we don't only interview people from the target audience or from whoever is supposed to use this thing, but that we also interview individual stakeholders from the team. And I think that goes in a very interesting discussion that touches up on the episode that we had even before the last one, where we spoke about how communication generally is a hard topic, but specifically also between, individuals or teams working together in your organization. I remember we had this project where there was the core team was already like 6 or 7 people. And it was very interesting when we spoke with them all together, where they felt that they were like, it came across as if everyone was on the same idea, but only when you spoke to them individually, we sort of uncovered their individual stance and their point of view, right? Like it did go in the same direction, but it was very interesting to find out their individual goal with this project and also their individual implementation idea in their specific area, right? Like what they would put emphasis on if they were in charge, I guess. I'm not sure if this is about being in charge, but yeah, these different points of views on the thing that you set out to make. I think that is very interesting because if you don't surface those early on, then those are the kinds of opinions that will influence these endless discussions further down the road in the project, right?
Yeah, so I think for us, this step is important to, as you said, collect all these different points of view, but also get an understanding of the constraints business-wise or from a technical point of view, like all the technical constraints, get all of this together, because this is important for the next step that we're taking. So we're collecting all these requirements, like what are the data requirements from the target audience, like what are the technical constraints that we have in implementation, what can we not do when we work on solving this problem. So we collect all this to inform the next step, which is already kind of a design step where we start drawing wireframes.
Yeah, I love that phase. I gotta say, I think I love wireframes because they're just so easy to make. Like if we say wireframes, then imagine this as the digital equivalent of a napkin drawing. Maybe a little bit better, I guess. Like you have more space than on a napkin. But, you know, it's just black and white. It's if let's imagine an app or a website for a second, then a wireframe is a black frame around every individual section that you have on a screen at once. And then interactive elements, like you're going to see like a link or a button or if, you know, stuff like that. And then actual copy text, right? Like this is before I think many people know wireframes, and then it says like this weirdo pseudo Latin lorem ipsum text, placeholder text in general. But we found out, I think, that wireframes become a whole lot more useful to people when you put in the actual text that you're going to say in this section. Like it doesn't necessarily need an image. It doesn't even need styling, right? Like before, we always had this idea especially in agency work, that customers usually said, well, but we can't imagine the product if it doesn't look like the final thing. So it has to be fully designed and right? Like it has to have images and colors and everything correct, so to say. But to put together wireframes that basically have the right text on the buttons that you're going to press, and in like headlines, maybe not even the full text of the like, I don't know, something like this, but to say what the headline is going to be for a section, what this is going to do. This actually gets you pretty far. If you do interviews then.
Yeah, I think also that especially not focusing on the styling, like it's hard to imagine how this will look like, but somehow we transcended this and made people focus on the actual content. And that is a more like, it's in my view, a more helpful way to think about a product than looking at how it could look like, because how it will look like depends a lot on what you're going to say on a page or in a like on a screen of an app. If you can't give a nice introduction to what you're trying to do, then the nicest design doesn't work. And this is also the point where we usually have a good idea of like the 5 screens that we're designing. And we already have the technical requirements and constraints in place. And once we start filling in the content, we can see if we're actually adhering to these constraints or if we're breaking with these. And this is very valuable. And I think also for our stakeholders, usually an exciting phase, because they see, it might not work like this after all, even though they imagined it would. And being in this very low fidelity environment, it's very easy to change stuff around and see if we could make it better by moving stuff over to the next screen.
And I think that is the important point, that we can do it just like that. It takes to put together the wireframe for 5 sections on a website. I don't know, you can do that in an hour or whatever. Like the hardest part is literally to think about the text, like about the content of what you're actually trying to say. And so the wireframe, like making the wireframe in itself is not even the hindrance. Like you can just get out a Word document and start typing down your homepage. And then someone who can use like Miro or FigJam or any sort of virtual whiteboarding thing can already make the wireframe.
And circling back to what you said before about the alignment of the stakeholders, I have the feeling that usually at this stage already we find where there's diverging views of the product.
Yes.
And that's very nice, because we can talk about the differences there before having even started with anything.
And also, like, I think the first time, I'm going to say, we busted the myth of that people say, well, we can't imagine if it's going to be right or wrong if it doesn't look like the final thing. Because this is something that usually our customers say, like and our customers are not the users that we're trying to optimize for, right? And so when people come along and say, we need the final product to, at least in a design, to judge if this is what we want, right? Then that was something that we always just had to accept. And it made project management like a little bit risky, to be honest, because you had to put in so much work up front before someone in the realm of the decision makers could in fact confidently take a decision for one direction or another. And it was always, as you also said before, it's always a mixture of the content, of the imagery, of the design, and of the actual copy text. And thus makes it very hard to pick apart which of these things actually need improvement, right? But the first time we made wireframes with just copy text in black and white and ran interviews with people from the target group. And I remember this so clearly because I was really stunned. I was going into this interview thinking, well, this is a little bit risky. I mean, I just have a black and white napkin drawing with text on it. Will this CEO of another company who's part of the target group that we're trying to solve for, will they now look at this in the first second and tell me, I don't understand what this is, But the opposite was the case. They didn't even care. And in this example that I have in my head, I had the feeling that it was like a mixture of that they didn't even care about the images. Like they didn't really miss it. And thus I almost had the feeling that they were kind of glad that they didn't have to concern themselves now with marketing images or whatever, because they went onto the website, read the headline in the hero section, and gave their feedback based on exactly and only this. And that was very helpful because you knew that what they were looking at was rough design at best, right? Like it didn't even matter if the headline was centered or not. I think I had it on the left side, and then there was a box that said, like with a cross in it, that just said, image to support the headline here, and nothing more. And they read the headline and focused on this right away. And with this, in an interview, what's so nice is that you don't even have to wait for the verbal feedback. You can just look at their face, and see. You can kind of see the feedback forming that you're going to hear in a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
And that is so much helpful. That is so helpful to see and observe.
This is already the next step in our process usually. So we use the wireframes to come up with like a click dummy or clickable prototype that we then show to people and have exactly this experience that we then learn what about the story that we're trying to tell, or like the guardrails that we put up works and what doesn't.
Yeah, that's true. And I think what also helps in this is that you pick a story, right? Like we're not making the entire website as a clickable wireframe, but we always think in certain user journeys, and that can be an onboarding funnel, or that can be how you come into the app, onto the dashboard for the first time. And we want to know if the information that we present on this dashboard is relevant information for you and if it makes sense. So it's always a relatively limited scope, but that, same as the wireframes in itself, helps to keep people focused on what we're trying to find out. And with this, I think it also unlocks the possibility to talk to only like 3 or 5 people. Because if you just have this one thing that you're trying to find out, people stay on the topic. And usually after like the 3rd or 4th person, their feedback starts to repeat. Like you can see the pattern of what's going wrong. And this is, I think, very satisfying to see as a result, because it takes away this uncertainty or this feeling that everything is so complex to find like the good solution, right? Like, and if you have like your entire website built in designs and then present that in a huge round and you try to get feedback on that, then you will get feedback for everything on the planet, for the corner radius and the button color and the all of this stuff. But no one, after giving their feedback, I think even the interview participants don't feel like they said something that satisfies whatever you were looking for. Like everybody looks confused and has a bunch of stuff on their plate now. And so at this point, we're really usually at a stage where you did discovery research, you did wireframes, and you did usability testing on small clickable prototypes in black and white wireframes. Then what?
Yeah, now it's time to actually start implementing an MVP, I'd say.
Really? Yeah.
So like this includes design and implementation, I guess. So now you have something like the wireframe will act as a very clear briefing to your designers because we now know what content needs to go where. There's no hey, we just put the text into the design and it's way too long, because you do it the other way around. You have the long text and now the design department can deal with it and find a space for it. And yeah, you can start thinking of like, which user flows are to be implemented. So there's a lot of clarity for implementation too. You know what kind of functionality you need at which point, and can start thinking about the APIs necessary to do so.
And it even for all the copywriters and for people you need to maybe provide visual content, right? So I think design, you can easily split that up into two rough big areas. So one part of design is to think about the layout and maybe like the visual part of the branding, and if something is going to be blue or green, or if it's going to be a soft shadows or not. But like this is all one thing that applies to your entire product that you're building. But then there's the content part that is not text, and that can be videos or images or 3D models or whatever. And all of that also takes time and planning to make. And so what really speeds up the entire project here is that these wireframes act like a blueprint for everyone, like an inventory of what's going to be needed to make this a reality, right? Like even if you don't make like all the wireframes clickable and tested every aspect of what you put together, but you tested like the core things, like the core user journeys that were important to you, but you can still lay out the entire product as wireframes and thus have all the information at hand for people to work in parallel that usually comes one after the other and actually has the potential to destroy each other's work, right? Like what you just touched on already, like a very common problem that agencies always have is that you make the design, you make it pretty, you even look for stock images to support the story, and then you only have placeholder text because the content is not ready yet and is not considered part of designing the product, so to say. And then, right, like this is one classical thing. And then all of the design is ready. Everybody's super hyped. It looks great. And then the conflict arises when the real copy comes along that is for sure not going to fit into the design, because that's always the case.
I think the core point being that design is very good at also hiding complexities in the stuff you're working on. And this is what a design department will do. They will work on hiding the complexity to make it feel nice and lightweight. And this is like it's a great feature, but it is a problem if you don't know what the complexities are. And so everybody's discussing design
Yeah.
when they should be discussing like what are we trying to solve here, or what are we trying to say, or what are we trying to get the visitor or user to do.
And
So
something
that's tricky.
that I heard a lot from designers too, like not only ourselves, but like working on projects for the last 10 years, is that I think there's even like this little interesting misconception that people think designers love to have no constraints and just go nuts on the green field. But I think actually it's much more helpful for designers to know what is the text going to be? How long is it supposed to be? What is it going to say? Are we also going to do Italian and French? Or is this just going to be English? And, you know, is the button going to say, okay? Or is it going to say something like, click now to go to the next step of this or that? And because all of these constraints influence what the visual solution will be to all of this. Like, as you just put it so beautifully, designers try to break down complexity and to make it consumable. But they can only do that if they have the problem at hand, like right there. And this is what a wireframe solves for so beautifully, because you have an inventory of the images that you're going to need. Like, there is a placeholder box that says video here about something. You have the text, you have the buttons, you have all of the sections that you're going to have in the final thing. So this is really a briefing, much more helpful than a long Word document, right?
Yeah.
And that just speeds them up. Like, that gives the opportunity to make a version of what you want that is much closer to the final product than if it's just a shot in the dark, so to say.
Yeah, and this, like once you have MVP implemented on the design, then you're also at a nice place, because now you can do actual usability testing of the product. You show it to people out there, can validate that what you did before worked, and the results will tell you, yeah, it did work, or it did mostly work, or some things didn't work. And then what you can do is, basically start over for just a subset of features or things that you were building. And that's really nice, because you can now do the same process again that you know already, but on a smaller scope. And you can also launch into the next session for the next feature that follows the same process. And I think this is what we found out works very well for us, that we can think in these steps and parallelize these.
Yeah. And I mean, what we just said about designers needing the constraints, that's not only for the designers. I think like what we're trying to break up here, and how all of this, what we're describing, is massively more, first of all, more on target, and second of all, a lot quicker, is that what counts for the designers is that they need the constraints, counts for everybody else in the project as well. Like, that counts for your sysops people. They have to know what sort of infrastructure they have to set up for, right? Like, they need to know, am I going to need like this and that database? Am I going to need authentication, security, anything? Then there's the backend people, like, to, in fact, set up everything for the information to be stored later on. Like, and all of these things can happen in parallel as soon as you have the wireframe, because then your individual teams don't have to anticipate what it might be that you're making, but then they literally have a blueprint to talk about. And that also enables, I think, this much more integrated culture of the teams working together, that usually doesn't happen, because usually it's this waterfall process, right? Like, it's somebody has a good idea, and then we make a design, and then we fill up the design with the actual content, and then we give this to the developers for the very first time, and then they make something, and then to describe a worst case scenario, then you're 3/4 done with the actual technical solution. And then legal comes in and says, well, but this is not GDPR compliant, and if you get everyone informed of what the final thing and the scope of the final thing is supposed to be, then they can go in and help and do their whatever they know about can help to reach the goal. And also this is very satisfying to work in. Like it feels like everybody's rolling and doing their thing and chipping on. That's pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, I think what I find interesting about it is that each of these phases, from discovery research to the wireframing and usability testing, like there's always an artifact that comes out of it that informs the next step and feeds back into the same process again. So once you have the usability testing done in the end on an actual MVP, you can start thinking about another iteration of discovery research because you want to learn about a certain aspect that's still not clear or not optimal. And so it really works together nicely from like front to back and also in parallel.
Yeah. And another interesting side effect of this research in an iterative form that you sort of do it all the time, right? It's just like you don't talk to a couple of people and then ignore them for half a year, but you sort of foster a fan base almost. Mm-hmm. Like it depends on who you're selling to, of course. Like if it's a B2C thing, then you might in fact foster like a little community of early adopters. And the same thing can be true in a B2B context, for sure. Like if you have a certain, who your customer is, if internal or external, doesn't even really matter. But there's this psychological effect really, that I think, I don't know if this is an official term, but I heard from it, being coined as the IKEA effect, where people are, feel more connected to the solution if they had the chance to contribute. And even if in the smallest tiny way, but if people have the feeling that they contributed to whatever they get to use, then that seems to create like a much stronger emotional connection to the product, which is also interesting. But I can kind of see it, like if I didn't just, order it on Amazon Prime, but I actually had to take a shovel and dig a hole or something, then whenever I pass that spot in the garden, I'm like, well, very good flower that I put here, and I'm kind of proud of the flower growing along, right? And the same thing can happen to your product, that if you ask people what they want, if they get to give feedback on a very concrete thing, and then because you're working in quick cycles, a couple of weeks later, they actually see the fruit of their feedback. That's very exciting. And that's the way to create like a super fan base, I would say. Yeah.
I agree.
All of this probably brings us to when and how in your project status you can apply these tactics, right?
Yeah, so this was basically the greenfield thing that we were talking about, right? That you start with the discovery research and then take it step by step. But as you said, there usually has been some research done once we come into play. And so, this is, of course, true for an initial product launch. You can do this with on the green field and start with an idea and then do the discovery research and probably also make this broader to actually do competitor analysis and understand who the people you should be talking to are and discover about the target audience while doing interviews, discover who your target audience actually is. So this is the basic idea if you start from scratch, that you start with a broader discovery research to know more about the problem space.
Yeah, the same idea just applies for if you already have your digit product, right? Like it actually, I think if I reminisce about the process, then it's probably just always the same, no matter where you are. Like if you're a startup and you're like this tag team of 5 people, work that way. It's just super satisfying. It gets you, it gives you this North Star to shoot for. And it even, like, I mean, coming back to the MVP discussion, if you properly talk to people during discovery research, and if you then do usability testing, even on the wireframes, then you'll have a pretty clear answer of what the minimum viability of your product is, right? Like if people go in and feel just very happy about the wireframes that you're presenting and say stuff like, oh my God, this would be so awesome to have. Like, this is where I usually make like 4.5 interlinked Excel sheets that I have to send to my coworker. Then you're already golden, I would say, because that is something that takes a pain away.
Yeah, and it can, like we've talked about products, but it can also be done on a feature level. Like you can just isolate a feature and do the same process again to extend a product that you already have. And you might learn something new from it also for the features that you already implemented, which is nice. And this is the added benefit of doing so, just talking to people, listening to what they have to say and see how these processes work together. So I think it's actually a really powerful tool, especially if you have a product already.
Absolutely. And I think also, to be super clear, since we work this way, we just apply this method to any kind of project we work on. That can be like a marketing landing page, all the way to an app that is only used by the internal staff, really. Like, because the process, you always have a customer, and doesn't matter if they're inside of your organization and paying in internal budgets or time or, you know, whatever the currency is, so to say. Like, it doesn't have to be real money paid in subscription fees or whatever your pricing model is. But so there's always someone who's using whatever you're making and doesn't have all of the knowledge that you have. They don't know about the original idea. They don't know the entire premise of this thing, and you got to make it work for all of them. And we believe the only way to really get there is to involve those people, like to involve representatives of this group to make sure that you're going to hit on target. And that can be your internal accountants. That can be, I don't know, another spin-off of your current company that you're trying to build a product for. All the way to, your B2C customers out there. And that's, I think, I would say this is sort of a paradigm shift in how products are going to be made also in the future, right? Like if we're looking far into speculative how software might be built during the next 10 years or whatever, everybody's talking about AI-supported personalization of features and all of this. It doesn't really matter how software is going to be made, but I think as long as it's being made for humans, who are just, let's be honest, random at times, right? Like we're just not predictable machines. There's like a high level of entropy always. People are in this mood one day, in another mood the other day. Like there's so many factors playing in for humans to successfully interact with your product that this is really the core of the design process and the important part of making a successful thing. Like if you then hand code everything, or actually, I don't know, build this from wood or whatever, I don't know, I'm not good at picking up examples, but like the implementation doesn't really matter. Like if your AI codes your software, fine. If you have like 20 people handcrafting the thing, also fine. But whoever is there wants to know what they're going to build.
Yeah.
And this is just such an elegant way to go about it. Plus, I really enjoy talking to the people who are going to use the product in the end. This is really also just a very enjoyable process.
Yeah, and I think an important part to emphasize maybe at the end here is that in our experience, this speeds up the process a lot because you have clear constraints from the very beginning of your process, and that helps everybody think about what they want to achieve, what they want to do with the product, and what should go into the product and the features.
And it's not only the working in parallel part that speeds up your project. It's basically in the old saying of the customer is always right. Like if everyone in your organization, including you as the decision maker, including all product managers, all engineering managers, even, customer success people, if folks know why they're doing something, then this is, I think, the same mental model as goal setting. Like if you share with people why something's happening, the motivation is just much higher to reach this goal, like this set out goal. And as long as this is aligned, then you will have less discussions, quicker decisions being made, less opinionated discussions about what the next thing should be, because the next thing is already on the roadmap. Like you will hear this in your interviews. People will tell you, oh, you're making this amazing. You know what would also be very cool? And if you just collect the votes of different features that are requested, then there's just no guessing in what you should be building, right? And yeah. And I think this is our segue to the next episode, where we're gonna continue. We're going to continue on this story and how to really make your users, basically how to turn them into collaborators in your project, right? Cool, awesome. Thanks again, Dan, for coming on and doing this series with me. Awesome. All right. See you on the next one.
See you.
Bye.